While I'm here at Fog, I'm writing a series of poems about caretaking, and so that's what I'm gonna read. My mother had a heart transplant a few years back, and I was her primary go-to person, and I'm interested in, I'm interested in subjectivity, and I'm interested in presence. It's a sort of role where you're behind the scenes, but you're also sort of tasked with synthesizing a lot of information. And just to think about all the sorts of data that goes into figuring out how well we're doing and what is our body doing and how well our bodies are communicating with us. So I'm interested in these questions. And so I'm gonna read a little bit from that series. It's called We Will Take Any Mother. At least that's what it's called right now. A series is real. The face does distort our contrapuntal body. Muscles beneath the surface of her face pull in opposite directions, darker and lighter areas, like a social studies diagram illustrating the schema of mesa, cavern, and town. It is not a real place you know, a collection of features, but no real occurrence, like my face closed down when I am not looking at her. I make my face a blind. I hide all my guns. Get back to your mother as a child grabs hold the soft of mother's upper arm. Near and not in. Maps should not be conflated. Object permanence is the first mother hidden in her own hands. Peek at the mother now lost in a field of. This is how the landmark works. Hands you know pulled back to reveal the familiar face you have forgotten. Admit it. My mother got out of the car. I reached over to close it. Her face, superficies. One is always alone. This is the real work. Building the fog of relationship, or the keen, or the weft. Wheels turn beneath us as day is the final push, bearing down, mother. I feel suddenly certain every scattered face is cause for grief. Every mountain without appreciation, a name. This is not a sight error. Dashes along an analog dial like the face of someone you love in pain. In California, on the map, the red line, pain has removed her too. I love Sutro above other towers as it reveals all the ways we will take any mother. Day is like waking into our real location where we have already grown tired. Of relationship, we make a wail. Dear diplopia, dear visual field defect, even this block in the ambient pathway, neurological insult, fog. An analogy is not an emotion. A landmark is not something we fool. Big Mama is in charge of bringing out one to play, then putting her away. She's sleeping. I was living in California when my mother, I first got the call that she may not live through the night. It was Pride 2009. I was on a sailing trip. It was quite beautiful. And I got this phone call and they said, okay, we need you to get across the country back to Ohio very quickly. And so I think about this idea of landmarks when it comes to my mother and the ways that we like have these sort of people who are our touchstones. People are the folk who we sort of, you might not think you're revolving around them. Like I was like, oh, I'm a free person. I'm being a writer. You know, I'm moving to California. But there's a sort of revolving that happens. I think that if something gets out of whack with the landmark, like, oh no, we're lost. So I think that's a big part of why I think about, or why I surmise Sutro keeps popping up. Just because of how that landmark was important to me as a figure that I didn't think about in the city, that I appreciated but didn't think about. I wasn't a fangirl. There are lots of people, at least when I was living in San Francisco, who had tattoos of Sutro. You can get a lovely belt buckle, like all sorts of like merch for this item or this structure as a kind of spirit animal structure of folk. And so yeah, I'm thinking about map making and what it means to come home. And when I moved back home, I was there for 6 years or so in my mama's house, just being a grown up in my mama's house. And so, and so that's also pretty tricky to think about the landmark as something that you you want to get away from, but you can't quite get away from it. I also think a lot about the body as a kind of topography. They have, so when you get a heart transplant, they put you through this tomography machine, and a part of what it does is give cross sections and also shows like depths, so you can sort of go through your body with this machine. It's really cool. And so when I was working for this cardiovascular research foundation in New York, some of the fancy, you know, cardiologists would take their glamour shots with the tomography machine, like as they're like prop in the shot. And I'm thinking about this machine whose job it is to sort of plumb the depths of what the body is and how it's working. And so I think about that also, and thinking about my mother. You know, you have several surgeries, they break all these bones, they stitch them back together, they wire them back together, and then there is a kind of like, you have scars that come up, you have keloids that come up that sort of changes the way that you relate to like where your organs are changes. So it's very strange. Another thing I like to think about is this MRI machine, they put you inside if you are an oncology patient. And so my mom had a little bout of lung cancer. They did a lobectomy of a lobe of her right lung. And so when you get this training, when you get this scanning happening, it looks like a solar system, because you're just looking at the places where the blood vessels are, and you're looking at what might be a mass, and it looks like, you know, the Milky Way. And so just thinking about how it is that we find these moments of expansion and space and depth in terms of how we are looking at the body. That's really cool. It's interesting for me, being a person who is not a part of a lot of those things. Like I sit in a room and I wait, and then somebody comes out, and then we have a meeting, and maybe the doctors will show, oh, this is what this particular test meant. But thinking about like what is happening in these spaces of waiting too, as a kind of topography, you cycle through the same rooms in the hospital, and then over here it's like, oh, this person didn't get well, so we're going to go through that door, or oh, this person is recovering fine, we're going to go through this door. And it's very tricky to think about as a space of revolution, and about, you know, in terms of what things are hidden and what things are revealed. Even if you have all the data in the world, you don't really know what's going on. You make a educated guess based on numbers going up or numbers going down. I started out writing essays first, and yeah, I think that, you know, what I want a poem to do has to do with building a landscape in a sort of environment of feeling, a sort of kind of a lane of perception. And so that's why all this field information is important, especially being a Black woman, queer woman. I think that taking over the page and putting the reader in a location that I create is important to me. The same thing for essays. I think what I'm interested in essays has to do with like an argument, the emotion. And so part of that has to do with finding lyric spaces that feel real to me or feel important to me, besides the sort of larger master narratives that we might get about a subject or an event in the sort of larger cultural landscape. I'm interested in the moments of silence, moments that are more personal, but also where you may not be able to add everything up into some nice picture. I don't really feel like that's often true for me, because I have, you know, got your intersectional like social location, so there's going to be lots of different things coming at anybody at the same time, and I want to make space to sort of let the threads be untied. So I received the seed of a poem, and it has often to do with like a sense of spectacle and a sense of mystery. And so I have something, I know it has a meaning, it is an image, it is a singular image, and my job is to figure out what in the world I'm supposed to be learning about the human condition that's encoded in this like seed of event, this image making moment. But for essays, it's different. Usually for essays, I'm thinking about larger questions of like citizenship or identity or sort of responsibility, accountability. And I will often have a series of images that I know sort of, if you sit them next to one another, they reveal some larger complication or larger depth. So if I'm talking about disaster relief or disaster preparedness, and I'm talking about the ways that we treat urban blight, or I'm talking about the POT systems in some county jails in terms of this actual architecture compared to POT systems in several of the designs of our public housing, it's because I'm noticing just in my world these sort of correlations that I feel like should challenge us to look again at what we're doing with one another.